High school to CNC programming and beyond. I want to welcome our loyal viewers today to another live stream session of SOLIDWORKS Manufacturing Live. I'm your host, John Milbery. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I have with me a very special guest today, a gentleman by the name of Jeremiah Bissell.
Hello,
Jeremiah,
everyone.
how are you? Good?
Good. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So Jeremiah, the name of our theme today was from high school to CNC programming and beyond. And, as I've worked with you over the last couple of months, I began to realize just how really special you really are in the skill sets you've achieved at such an early age. So what I wanted to do for our viewers was kind of, rewind the clock back in time. And let's step back. Well, it's not that long ago, right, for you. So let's go back to maybe what kind of spurned your first, your first interest in mechanical things, engines and things like that. And I know from watching some of your videos that it was your love of motorcycles from junior high. Can
Yeah,
you?
so
Yeah.
when I was younger, I think about in eighth grade, I got one of my first dirt bikes, and that was the first bike I really started to work on myself and do a lot of the maintenance myself and learning a lot online and just trying to figure out like how to do it. And my dad's really into cars and all that, so he helped a little bit too with all the mechanical stuff. But yeah, I started with changing the oil and all that sort of stuff, changing clutch levers, and shortly after I jumped into like cars, and then here I am today with the CNC programming too, and yeah.
Well, I take a look at that bike, and I tell you, it reminds me of a love that I had when I was a younger child as well, junior high school time. Dirt bikes are phenomenal, and from what I can tell, you're pretty darn good at riding them. So show me, do we have any B-roll for some of Jeremiah's jumps? Because I'm sure that this is probably why you needed to learn how to repair your bikes a little bit. Oh, that's a beautiful jump. So Jeremiah, where did that take place right there?
So just out in front of my house, there's a pretty fun desert spot that I go to a lot with my friends, and that's a pretty recent clip. But as you can imagine, back in the day, the jumps weren't that smooth. So
Yeah, I tell you what,
definitely a lot of crashes. So
talking to you when we were doing some machining together in my shop, you mentioned that you had jumped at one point almost 100 feet. Is that correct?
yeah, that's the biggest jump I've ever done. It's a closed down track not far from here called Speed World, and they have a big 100-footer like tabletop that everyone talks about. That's the biggest jump I've ever done.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So I guess there was a point in your career where you could have gone off and done that Evil Knievel thing, right? Or you could have stayed on track, right? And
Right.
gone, entered high school and done, engineering courses in STEM. As we look at all your different talents, and we're going to get into those today, let's rewind and go back to the beginning of high school. What were some of the courses and the things that you did in high school that kind of set you up for the success that you're having today?
Yeah, so once I got started on the dirt bikes after a couple of year or two of riding them in seventh and eighth grade, I moved into high school, and then in high school there was an engineering course that I started to take. I actually ended up taking that for all 4 years, and it really taught me a lot about like working with my hands, and also did some stuff on programs like SolidWorks. So I also got my CSWA there, which was cool.
Oh, wow. So while you were in high school, you got your Certified SolidWorks Associate
Yeah.
certification. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and we
Um,
actually took the test in class, and the teacher led all of it, which was awesome.
oh, that's awesome. So I've got to ask you, when I first learned SolidWorks, it's quite been a ways back in 95. When I first learned it, I was so excited. I went around the house and I modeled everything that I could find. There was a teapot. I modeled it. There was a bookend. I modeled it. What was your experience like once you realized that you could really model about anything that you could visualize.
Yeah, so when I initially found out about SolidWorks, I never really like was shown into the machining world, so I didn't really know I could bring it to life until recently when I went over to your shop and learned how to use a machine. But back when I first learned how to use SolidWorks, I modeled a couple of different things. Like on my dirt bike, I modeled like some clutch levers and little like shift levers and just small stuff. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But it never really settled into me that I could like bring it to life.
Oh, I got you. Okay. So you know that, and that's what makes manufacturing people very special. It's that incredible feeling that we get when we not only do the design, but we're able to actually realize that, right? And we're actually able to see it to fruition. Doing that is what hooked me. Tell me a little bit about when you built your first part. What was it like when you first built your first part? And explain that a little bit, just real quick, to the audience.
Well, I mean, this kind of goes all the way back to like with dirt bikes. You know, when I was younger, I would look at these pieces of engineering and I would be like just completely awestruck. Like, I can't believe this thing works. I can't believe it does this. I just would look at it and just I couldn't even fathom how it worked and all that sort of stuff. But as I grew up, you know, I started working on the bikes and I would realize, you know, okay, there's not too many parts to it. You know, there's all these little things that work together. And then, you know, as I got into cars, that was more realized too. I was like, okay, you know, these cars, there's all these different parts combined together, you know, to work. And there's different components for each system and all that. So once I kind of got into the machining thing and I saw like how you could bring that stuff to life, it just opened a whole new world. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, you can really make anything for these cars and these bikes. And yeah.
Yeah, it's empowering, isn't it? To be able to know that you've got the skill set to not just design, but to actually create and
Yeah,
not depend
definitely.
on others to do it. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about real quick and make sure that we cover, and that is, tell me about some of the courses that you took, the engineering courses that you took in high school, because I have a feeling that they gave you the fundamental foundation you needed to be kind of where you're at today. Can you kind of just give me a brief overview of what you took and really what you enjoyed?
Yeah, so it was just an elective class at our school that we offered, and it was just engineering one, two, three, four, you know, five, six, just through high school. And we really started with like just the basics and learning how to use like a multimeter and other sort of measuring devices, you know, nothing like crazy. And then we slowly worked into like some math, like we learned trigonometry in there, and then we started to move into the program. You know, every year we would kind of spend like a third of the year doing a different thing, and then, you know, as the next years came, we would develop that. And we actually did like some robots too. We had like these little robot kits where we'd put together a robot and, you know, code it and all sorts of stuff. You could put little claws on it and different sort of things. We'd have to like complete games with the robots, so we'd have to design the robot for like a specific purpose, and that
Hmm.
really like helped cement like, okay, cars work, the engine does this, and, you know, the AC unit does this, and all, you know, all the different components.
Wow. So were you programming Arduino, or what were you?
Yeah, so it was a Vex programming. So
Hmm.
it was like a micro Vex, I think, kit, and it's
Hmm.
like a entry level program. It was just like block programming. It wasn't anything like typing out or any sort of Python or anything like that. It was just
Uh,
block programming, and it was pretty simple, but, you know, it helped me realize like it's possible to work on these things and create these things.
yeah, and get them to add intelligence to their motion, get them to do what you want, and
Yep.
eventually to fulfill a chore. That's fantastic because today, when we look in the world of manufacturing, robots are being brought in and they're complementing the workforce today, right? Especially
Yep.
in the shop. Um, One of the first applications we see is machine tending, right? With some of the robots. And one of the really great ways to do that very easily is to tend an NC lathe. And so we're seeing a lot of that. So all of that went great, and then you turned 16, right? 17. And it was time to kind of get a car, and you started to develop another passion,
Yep.
right? Can you tell me a little bit about? I don't know much about it, but I think it's called drifting.
Yeah, so when I first got into cars, I mean, my dad's been into cars his whole life, and he's more into like the classic sort of things. So
Hmm.
he likes doing like restorations and all that. And I was looking at that, and I was like, man, I got to do that too. So I was watching YouTube and stuff, and I was like trying to find out what kind of car I want, and just the drifting thing really caught my eye because it was just like I'd never seen someone drive a car like that. They're just sideways the whole time, and feel like they're gonna lose control, but they're still in control somehow. So the first like thing I wanted from the car was it to be rear wheel drive and manual. I was like, it has to be a manual. It has to be rear wheel drive. Those are the two requirements.
Yeah, it sounds like a motorcycle driver fell in love with drifting. Is what, and you know what? You're right. I have seen it, and it's beautiful, right? To be able to control that drift and be able to control that spin. So um, that's fantastic. You mentioned your dad's influence. So your dad evidently does some things with cars, right?
Yep.
Tell me how he kind of influenced you to get a good understanding of how engines work and how to restore things and to work with things. What did you see your dad do, and how did he help you?
So in the beginning, I would just see him kind of he when I was younger, he had or I think it was a Charger or no, it was a Camaro. It was like a 70 Camaro and he was restoring it from like the ground up. So when we initially got it, I looked at it, it wasn't painted, it was gutted interior. I was like, this thing's a piece of junk. That's probably what my mom was thinking too, but he slowly started to piece it together and I was like just seeing it come to life was like really cool. I was like, wow, I want to do something like that someday. Seeing it get painted and the interior come together, and then he eventually put the motor in and all that sort of stuff. So
That's fantastic. So your dad was really kind of an instructor for you, as he kind of as you learned and witnessed and watched the process from start to finish. And that's
yeah,
good.
back
That's
then
good.
I didn't really like jump in and help as much, but I definitely watched him, and it really influenced me. So
Well, then eventually you got to the point, I think, where we'll talk a little bit about your drift car because your father influenced you, and you put that and all of your STEM courses to work. So tell us a little bit about that story.
yeah, so when I first started, or like I was saying, I wanted the rear wheel drive and the manual car. So I started looking online on like Craigslist and stuff. And I didn't have much money at the time, so I was really looking at cheap stuff. And back then, 350Zs were pretty cheap, and they were a really good drifting platform. I saw a ton of people on YouTube just spinning laps in them,
Mm.
just literally just beating on these things. I was like, man, I got to get one of these. These look really reliable, and I feel like I could learn a lot with these. So, like, I think it was only a week later that we found a Z on the offer up, and it was no motor, there's blown motor in it, and I decided to pick that up. My parents said that they would cover the shell. I think it was 2 grand for the shell, and it had the transmission and everything. It just was missing the motor, and it was a little bit. It was half taken apart, as you can see here.
Yes. So your job was to restore that, right?
Yeah.
And
So with never working on the Z's, my dad wasn't really familiar with it, so he wasn't super confident when we stepped into it. But we got it figured out eventually.
so tell me a little bit about it looks like to me like you had to do some electronics for sure. And you got a little of that from your high school course, but you also had to go find an engine, right?
Yeah, so I had to pick up the engine for it. I got an engine from this import place. I think it was $1,400 for the engine, and we ended up mating it to the transmission outside of the car, and then we dropped it in the car, as you can see in this photo. Yep. And once it was in the car, then we had to start working on the wiring harness and a couple other small things. But it really wasn't far off once we got the engine in.
Fantastic. So tell me a little bit about this engine. What displacement, what's the horsepower, and how is that engine really ideal for what you want to do with, drifting cars?
Yeah, so it's the stock engine for the Z. It was the engine that came out in 2005 is a VQ35DE. It's a 3.5 liter V6,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the engine that I saw a lot on YouTube. That was really reliable. The only problem with them is oil consumption, but if you keep them topped off on oil, they run like forever. It's crazy. Most
Fantastic.
reliable 300 horsepower for sure.
Oh my gosh. So what does that car weigh? That's 300 horsepower, and what's the weight?
The car weighs around like 3,200 pounds, I think.
Okay, wow. So you're able to drift with that car with absolutely no problems at all, right?
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people in the drifting scene say that it's good to start with a low power stock car just so you could kind of learn the basics and then start to upgrade from there.
Oh, fantastic. So you probably, as you were restoring your car, you probably bought a lot of aftermarket parts for it, right? Custom parts and things like that. Tell me a little bit about what you saw there and did you ever think about maybe I could build some of these parts?
Yeah, so it all kind of started with just getting the motor in, like I said, and once we kind of worked out through a couple different like wiring things that kind of held us up. Once we figured that stuff out, we moved into like piecing the rest of the engine together. I had to buy an intake. That was like my first probably aftermarket part was a air intake.
Mm.
And then I had to buy a few other small things around the motor that we just found out over time, like online and all that. And then you could see the hoses. I had to buy those, and then the engine cover on there, and then there's the intake too. But
So
yeah,
did,
once I started to piece the engine together, then I kind of started to move into the aftermarket thing. At first I really just wanted to get the car running and just to school was the goal because
gotcha.
I got it like close to the end of senior year. I think it was like 3 weeks out from graduation,
Mm.
and
Oh.
I tried to just get it thrown together as quick as I could because I wanted to take it to school so bad.
I don't blame you. And that was a beautiful car. So I got to ask on the cold air intake right there, is that how the 350Zs come with that motor, or did you add that cold air intake yourself?
Yeah, so that's just the aftermarket intake. That I was looking at just the stock options because when I got the car, it didn't come with one, and the engine didn't have one on it. So I
Ah,
was gonna replace it with the stock one, but I just went online and ended up finding an aftermarket one for pretty much the same price. So just ended up going with that.
fantastic. It lets it breathe a lot easier. So what about the exhaust? Is it pretty much stock exhaust, or what have you done with the exhaust? Anything?
Yeah, so when I first got it running, I was using a stock exhaust, and then I got a Tomei. It's like a full titanium catback. So I
Mm-hmm.
got that on it afterwards. That really woke it up. Made it sound so much better. It was awesome.
Oh, that's fantastic. You can get the air in and out pretty quick, and you get a little horsepower boost with that.
Yep.
Um, so let's take a moment now and let's kind of you've gone through this rebuild or the building of this car, and you of course got all your design experience. There was a point where you wanted to express, or you did express, more interest in machining and coupling that your design. Tell me a little bit about where that started and lead up to the time that you and I met, right? When we started to work together in the shop.
Yeah, so that all kind of came from my dad. Like I was saying earlier, he really showed me like the manufacturing thing because he's in the business. So he was like trying to explain to me like you'd be interested in this because you can create like automotive parts and dirt bike parts. I was like, that sounds cool. So we ended up linking up with John, and he gave me just some insight into machining and just some basic stuff, and it really like motivated me to see something come to life and see something that you can create on your own come to life is really cool.
Fantastic. So at this point, it really became important, I guess, to get you to start the CNC programming and building toolpaths. And that's something that you had done prior to coming to my shop. And it's also something that you did one evening in my shop when we created a part that we'll get to later. for your 350Z. So what, when you first came to my shop, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna talk about a little story that I think is funny, and I hope it doesn't embarrass you, but it was so funny. I couldn't help but laugh. Your dad called me and he goes, "Can Jeremiah wear open-toed shoes in the shop?" I'm sorry, Jeremiah. I don't want to tattle on you, but I thought, oh my gosh, Jeremiah literally just jumped on the flight and got here. You didn't. You're like me. Every time I go on something, I always forget something. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And I forgot the shoes. It was
yeah.
terrible. I came with my
Yes.
sandals on. I was like just completely misprepared right off the bat.
I thought it was funny, and I told your dad absolutely not. He goes, "Okay, we're going to Walmart." So that was great. So so you got in on a Sunday night. We decided that we were going to learn how, to do two things in my shop, right? One would be we were going to take some of your design work, and we were going to learn how to kind of take everything to a tool path, and you be the NC programmer, right? In other words, you created the machining operations, the feeds and the speeds, and chose the tooling. And then you actually got into becoming a machinist and setting up the tools and setting up the machine. And so let's begin there and take you kind of through that process. What was the first thing that I taught you how to do?
So I think it was just the startup procedure for
Yes,
this machine. Yeah.
yes. And they're picky, aren't they? The startup procedures for NC machine tools.
Yep.
And so every day we had Jeremiah turn the machine on, and at night we had him turn it off. And we learned that on all machine tools, NC machine tools, that when you turn them off, it's the exact opposite sequence of how you turn them on. So it's not just you go over and just hit the on button, right? You've got to do a few things.
Yep.
So that went great, and we got the machine up and we got it turned on, and we had fresh coolant in it, and we were pretty much ready to go. So at that point, we started to pay attention a little bit to tooling, right?
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about what, one of the things that we did was we learned about how to set tooling length, right? And we went over to a little area in my shop where we set up the tools. Can you kind of explain that to the audience and, what you were thinking and what you actually experienced as you were doing that? What was that process like for you?
Yeah. So it kind of relates to cars too. So when I first started working with cars, I really had no idea what to do. But after a few Google searches, you get there. But with the machining, I kind of like stepped in with real little experience, and we started looking at the tooling, and for the engineering stuff taught me a little bit about it, but it wasn't crazy. It was just how to use the multimeter and how to use these measuring devices we were using. So once we got into the shop, we brought the tool over to the stand where we set it up. We measured the tool offset. We would enter it into the machine, and you would make sure that the machine knows what tool it's using and where it is. And we went into the Heimer as well. We started using the Heimer, and we learned how to set XY0 and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that, because usually when I train people, they're a little apprehensive about moving the jog, right? And jogging
Yeah.
around and hitting the axis because of the limit switches. Because when we start out, we're right on the limit switches, right? In X, Y, and Z. So you've got to kind of get that thing moving in the right direction to get the Heimer where you want it to go. Tell me about that. What were you thinking? Were you a little nervous?
Yeah, so we started with a sample part, and when we set
Right.
that one up, that was the first one we set up. I wasn't too nervous just because I have a lot of experience with like programs and like working on the computer a lot, so I felt like it was kind of similar. But yeah, we figured it out pretty quick. It wasn't too complicated.
Right, right. And we learned that, being able to set a local work offset coordinate system produces numbers that we as machinists and programmers can relate to more as it's related to the part rather than some abstract machine XYZ0 that's way up at the top and back over to one side. So that was excellent. We did a great job with that on the Heimer. The Heimer, of course, is a mechanical device, right? It's an indicator that we're able to do for both X, Y, and Z. Tell me, I showed you another way to do it, and I wasn't sure if that was your first introduction to a probe, but could you tell me a little bit about that and how it's different than using the Heimer?
Yeah, so once I figured out the Heimer and got comfortable with jogging the machine, we set up the test piece and we put it in. We made sure it was clamped properly and in place, and then he showed me a little bit about the automated probe that you have, and that was really cool. It was interesting to see the machine do a little bit more like on its own, and it was yeah. We used a couple of the procedures to find XYZ automatically, which was really nice.
Yeah, so the probe cycles that were built into the controller helped us find and our XYZ work offset origin, as well as for the Z. And what was the one thing that we had to do whenever we put a Heimer in there or we had a probe in there? We had to
make sure the tool offset was properly set because
yes.
Everything would be off. We did that a couple times. I definitely forgot to change the offset a few times.
Yep.
But
yep. And
we started to get it.
And I do that too from time to time. We also had to do what? Make sure that the spindle couldn't turn.
Yeah.
So we didn't accidentally turn on the spindle, right?
Yeah. So we had to open that upper part so that the spindle wouldn't turn on. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a spindle interlock that's set up to that cover. And if you open it up a little bit, the spindle will not turn. And there's a lot of machinists out there who won't admit it. But at one point or another, many of us have turned on a spindle with a Heimer in there. And of course, you can say goodbye to a $500 Heimer in less than a second when you do that, right? So, so we had some good time there. So tell me a little bit about the next big question was we looked at your tool paths, right? And we loaded those up. And we had a big discussion about speeds and feeds, right? Those magical speeds and feeds, right? And we were machining aluminum 6061 T6 on our test part. What did you kind of learn about that? When I'd given you a spreadsheet and we talked about how surface footage, right, for a particular material was going to give us a lot of the information that we needed.
Yeah, so once we got into the program side of things, like I said, I have a lot of more experience with that, and like I've played video games all my life, so I'm a lot better with computers than most, and it was a little bit more comfortable on that side of things instead of the machine because I've never been around a machine. But once we started to look into the feeds and speeds, I've really realized that this is where like experience is important because we started to mess with the feeds and speeds, and a lot of the stuff I had really no clue what to put, so you had to kind of guide me in that sense. But yeah,
it's a learning curve. But remember how we got after a couple of days, we got to where we could just kind of get a feel for what the RPM of the spindle should be and kind of what our inch per minute velocity of the tool path should be. And we were just kind of pulling numbers out, and they were kind of working. And you can get away with that with aluminum, right?
Yeah,
you can. And so by the way, I still have your test part that you made, and I promised your dad that I would that I would mail that to you, and I'm going to do that after this session today. So the first couple days we had some fun. We learned a lot, and then we decided, and you came to me and you saw some brass in my shop. What did you think when you saw that brass?
Yeah, so that was when we were trying to decide what kind of part to make, and I had modeled a few things on SolidWorks that I would think that was thinking would be cool. I modeled like an oil cap and a couple different things. I modeled a shift knob, and that's what we ended up going with was the shift knob. I saw the brass, and it was you had me pick it up. It was really heavy. I was like, oh, this would be perfect for a shift knob. So we ended up going in that direction.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we noticed was the brass was really, really heavy, right? A lot heavier than aluminum. And what did we think would happen if we used this heavy piece of brass as a shift knob?
Yeah, so when I first got into the Z and started talking about aftermarket parts like you were mentioning earlier, I installed a short throw shifter and a weighted shifter. And the short throw shifter was really nice because it shortened up the shifts on the car, so you could shift a little quicker. But at the same time, it made it more difficult. And I installed a little tiny like weighted shifter. It wasn't much weight. It was just like pound, I think it was, and
Hmm.
that helped with making the shift smoother and easier. But I figured if we added a little bit more weight, it would definitely help.
And it did, didn't it?
Yeah, a lot, a lot.
Can you describe that difference?
Yeah, so once I got the new shift knob over from the shop and we installed it into the car, it made the shifts literally like way smoother. As you can see, it's a little longer as well, so I had a little bit more leverage over the shifts, and it really helped the car.
Yeah, and that part is solid brass, isn't it?
Yeah, and then we ended up polishing it, which made it look really cool as well.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I watched your eyes light up when you were doing the polishing part because you were getting dirty, right? I warned you that you would. I said it's pretty dirty polishing, but um, the whole brass part, the shifter, just kind of came to life.
Yeah,
It
that's
just
when it really
started,
settled in. Like I
yeah,
made this, and it was a cool part. I was like, I can't wait to put this in the car.
yeah, and it was God, it had a mirror finish on it. You put that Z logo on the top of it, right? So we did a little bit of engraving, didn't we?
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
learned how to
So
use that tool, and that one is a little bit more important with the feed and speed, especially when you're working with brass. So
yes, it was right because it's so easy to break those little engravers. You've got to
yeah, really
be,
tiny tool.
yeah. So we had a lot of fun doing that. So this entire experience now, you've got, you've got this background, you've got this capability and this great talent for programming in three axis, right? NC programming. You've got a really good handle on basically running the machine, right? And I watched you. You were basically, I made you do all the setups, right? You did everything with the jaws and everything that we needed. We had to make some custom jaws and we had to do a few other things. Um, so tell me a little bit about what are some of your future plans about to continue your training? I mean, I know that you're just getting warmed up. You're just getting started, right?
Yeah, so it was cool for you to give me the opportunity to come out and have a more casual like introduction to it. And it was cool to see what was possible. Like I said earlier, it really motivated me. So I'm excited to go further with it. But soon I'm supposed to head out to MTS in Orlando, and I'm supposed to get some more hands-on training there, which it's a lot larger shop and they actually do like training, so it should be cool.
Now that's Al's shop, right?
Yeah, Al Steinmack.
Yeah, Al Steinmack. So Al's one of the premier instructional facilities in the United States, and my understanding is that he's got machine tools that are quite a bit larger than what I introduced you to. He's got really large Mazak machines. Any, what do you think about getting on those really big machines?
It's definitely a little bit more like nerve wracking because even with working with your machine, there was so many expensive things that I could mess up. But after working with your machine, I think I'm feeling more confident about it.
Yeah,
I think I should be able to handle it.
yeah, it should scale up, right?
Yeah.
Things will just be heavier, they'll be smoother, and they'll be a lot faster,
Yep.
right?
It's pretty cool too because they actually develop rocker arms, I think, for NASCARs or race cars. So it'll
Hmm.
be cool to see kind of like the production side as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you're actually going to go there. Are you taking any sort of online courses from Al? Are you doing any preliminary work? Tell us a little bit about that if you are.
Yeah, so before I even ended up going to your shop and getting a basic introduction to the machine, I was already doing online courses for with Al, and I was learning a little bit more about machines there. They have this like a simulation program and like a training program, so I was going through courses on there, going through the basics of two axis and three axis, and even lathes. I was learning more about lathes as well, and yeah, that kind of just got me started at least. And then now I'm working more with CamWorks solids and SolidWorks to do more like tool paths and all sorts of stuff.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you're getting a really great programming experience. You've got some pretty good machining experience, and it sounds like when you get to Florida that you're going to get much more professional experience. And so, you know what? Let's take a look. If I were to ask you to kind of glance into the crystal ball of the future, where do you think where do you think all this is heading? Or even better, where do you want it to head? What would you like to do?
So initially, I just wanted to start out with machining because I wanted to learn how to work with the machines before I started to program them. So it's my dad said it was kind of like you want to learn how to do math before you start using the calculator. So I started using the machines and learned about more about the machines, and then obviously I want to head into programming later on, and just seeing what is possible with the machines really like opened my eyes to what I can do with like automotive and stuff. So I'm hoping someday I can maybe open a shop and do like some aftermarket parts and do some custom work. It would be really cool to do that. That's my dream.
Oh, that's excellent. So I have a feeling that you're going to be very, very good at whatever you do decide to do going into the future. Your own shop, I think, would be just perfect. The aftermarket parts, I think you've got a really good handle on that. And I think that you could contribute, some really awesome parts that are out there because once you get into certain categories, it's funny, but there's not that much of a variety sometimes. You've just got a few large manufacturers and you've got their standard parts. Have you ever thought about doing customized parts for cars or custom parts for motorcycles where the customer actually gives you a design or wants you to create a design particularly for them?
Yeah, that would be really cool. I was hoping to kind of hop more into the custom sort of thing because then it's more, customer to like to me. I'm like more interacting with the customers. It's not like such on a large scale to where kind of like managing a business and worrying about all these sort of things. And like you mentioned earlier with the Z and like aftermarket parts, when I first started getting parts for the Z, I was looking at them and I was like, I wonder how these are made, and like I wonder if I can
Mhm.
make something like that. And once we got into the shop and we worked with the machine a little bit, I started to figure out, a lot of this stuff is really just made on a CNC machine, and it's really not that hard to do.
Sure, sure. Do you think someday that you might get a little bit more familiar maybe with casting or maybe with forging and, some of those different machining processes?
Yeah, so even right now, I'm started to kind of jump into fabrication a little bit too with my car. I've started to learn more about welding and all that sort of stuff. So I really want to try to like expand my skill set to be really wide range, and I just learn more and more every day. So hopefully I can start to learn more about lathes and 3 axis and 5 axis, all sorts of machines. And yeah, I'm interested to learn more.
Well, I think Al's going to cover a lot of that for you when you get down there to Florida. So I wish you the best of luck there. I do want to mention though, I know that you're a pretty good welder. I know that you've had to do some welding. I am a very novice welder. In fact, I had gotten my first welder last Christmas, and got some tips from Michael Buckley on what to buy and how to kind of run a bead. And I'm still learning. And there was a part of me that during our training, wanted to drag you over to my welder and go, Jeremiah, show me some stuff. But I knew that wasn't the time, and that our time was pretty limited, and we had a full agenda, and so we would stick to that, and we did, and we were very successful with it. So, as I talk to your dad, I've noticed that he's starting to send me different pictures of CNC machines that are used, and he's going, "Look at the prices on these," so I can tell that you guys are thinking about buying a CNC machine. I guess I got a couple questions in that regard. You have the room for it, right? Do you have
Yeah,
room?
Yeah, so we have a RV garage and then like a 2 bay garage. It's a pretty big garage. We definitely have some room. We're trying to empty out one half of the garage to fit a machine in there eventually.
Really? What do you think? What type of machine do you think you're going to get?
We're not sure yet. We're still kind of trying to figure it out. We're not sure if we want to get a machine. My dad's also interested in like a CNC plasma, which would be cool.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be really cool for like fabrication and making like little metal plates and cutting them out. Yeah, that would be really cool as well.
Yeah, and it would certainly help in handshake with your welding experience, right?
Yeah,
Those two would go together very, very well. So the other thing too is that a lot of the plasma machines today, right, are becoming very reasonable in cost. In fact, the whole NC market in general, especially from the hobbyist up to the professional, the prices have come down so dramatically over the last couple of decades that it really puts the technology, makes it available to anybody. And I wish you the best of luck as you're kind of searching for that. And I know that I'm going to be super, super excited when you guys do get your NC machine tool in there.
yeah, that would be really cool.
So, Jeremiah, you've obviously at a young age, at the age of 19, figured out what a lot of us don't know, and that is what we want to do for the rest of our lives and what makes us happy. So, I think that that's one of the things that makes you really special, Jeremiah, is that you kind of know what your passion is, and you've married that together with what you love to do and what you're good at. I mean, you're naturally gifted in these areas. So I just wanted to say, and, hats off to you for that because so many people go their entire life, trying to figure out what it is that they want to do and what they love. And we both know that if you love your work, you never really work a day in your life, right?
Yeah, it's actually funny you mentioned that because fresh out of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was just as lost as everyone else, and I was really trying to find something that would interest me and connect to some of my other hobbies and interests. And I think machining and CNC world is definitely like there. It's what I was looking for.
Well, I know that our viewers, as well as myself, we wish you the best of the luck in the future.
Yeah, I
And,
appreciate that.
and
Appreciate all the kind words as well.
oh, absolutely. And you know that I'm going to be right there with you and your dad and watching you grow and helping you and doing anything that I can do because we've had such a good time. And it's been very fulfilling for me as well. So, anything that you would like to say before we sign off to this wonderful audience? Anything you'd like to add, Jeremiah?
Yeah. Just know that like things are possible. It's not that hard if you start to apply yourself and start to look up things and start to figure out how to do stuff. Like when I bought my car initially, I had no idea how to put a motor in the car, and just with a couple basic tools and a couple of YouTube videos and a couple forums, we figured it out. And I mean, obviously my dad was there to help, but a lot of it he left to me because he wanted me to learn on my own as well. So
Oh, fantastic! So, I I listen. I want to be able to thank all of our viewers today for sitting in on this session from high school to CNC programming and beyond, right? And I think that I just want to thank our audience, and I want to wish them a great day, and to please tune into our next session of SolidWorks Manufacturing Live. And I want to thank our audience, and thank you very much.
thank you for having me, John.
You're welcome, Jim.
Very, very much appreciate the opportunity. It's awesome to be on here.
Oh, also too, there's one last thing that I want to do is I want to tell everybody that there is a link for basically manufacturing solutions that I'd like everybody, if they get a chance, to go to. It's www.machiningsolutions.com, and you can learn a little bit more about SolidWorks and some of our different manufacturing solutions. So with that, from high school to CM programming and beyond, We bid everybody a fair day.